please welcome our guest for today's presentation, Hesna Al Ghaoui. And can everybody hear me well? Great. So this is actually the first hybrid presentation that we've been doing. So this is we're closing the third year in the existence of our Hungarian American Scientists and Innovators Society monthly presentations on interesting topics. And if you recall, at the beginning we used to meet in person at SRI, the former Stanford Research Institute, and nowadays we did it online due to the pandemic. But I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome Hesna in person. So we are in person, and of course you guys are online as of now. But hopefully, maybe starting next year, we're gonna be able to all meet in person. And then of course we're gonna readjust the presentations time to the evening, so it would be easier for people to commute. Before I jump into today's topic, I do want to give you a heads up. If you go a slide back, Zoli, is that we have a new website, so please check it out. It's called Hungarian SV, like HungarianSiliconValley.com, and we're gonna post all of our latest updates there. So it's worthwhile to check it like once a month or so. And before again, I dive into today's topic with Hesna, I would like Zoli to kind of walk you through a little bit of the logistics. So Zoli is our VP. If you didn't meet him yet, go ahead, Zoli.
Thank you. So I will be just taking care of the logistics today. During the presentation, I will be muting the other participants. At the time of questions, please remember to unmute yourself. I can mute you, I cannot unmute you. And please remember, this meeting is not about politics. Thank you very much. Job is yours.
Thank you. So okay, so we can get in. If anybody you don't know me, my name is Csaba Szabó, and I'm the president of the Hungarian Scientists in Silicon Valley Society. And it is my great honor today to welcome Hesna Al Ghaoui all the way from Berkeley. And now we're at the moment in San Jose, actually. And we're going to be talking about fear, and more particularly how to fear bravely.
Yes.
Thank you. So maybe before I get into the topic, I can give a high-level overview of Hesna. So you want to put up the bio, Zoli, please?
Certainly.
Excellent. I don't know if you can read the fine print, but at a high level, so Hesna is a book author. She published more than 4 books on various topics. She's also currently a research fellow, researching actually the topic of fear and how to grow and grow out of fear, and then how to positively leverage fear in order to achieve growth within your life. Also, Hesna used to be a war journalist, so she's been in many conflict areas in about 20 countries, if I recall correctly. And so she experienced fear, in person, right? Like she was there in these conflict areas during, war, and that's how she connected to the topic. And nowadays, of course, with the pandemic, and all these, climate change, a lot of issues around us, forest fires here in the Bay Area. I think this notion of fear is very close to us. It's something that we are all trying to live with and manage. So I thought that this would be a very relevant topic for us to kind of learn from and share with you guys. So without any further ado, maybe I will hand it over to you, Hesna, and feel free to add anything I have missed. Obviously, we share your bio. I do know that you won a lot of awards, like Al Jazeera for your documentary films. Monte Carlo, a lot of other awards. A fabulous
You
career.
just made it to the final selection.
Oh, final selection.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to miss just the final selection. But yeah, lot of awards, amazing activity, and it's an interesting pivot in your career, right? Like, because you started out as a lawyer, you actually have a degree in law from Aalto University, but then you got into journalism, and particularly war journalism, and from this topic, you're doing psychology research. So that's very interesting. It would be also worthwhile, I think, to touch upon all these twists and turns in your career.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for all of you to be here today. And yes, there were quite many twists and turns in my career. Basically, how I ended up from studying law into journalism was a simple one, because I realized that law is not something that I'm really interested in, and I was already writing short stories, and then I started journalism step by step. And as my father is from Syria and my mother is Hungarian, even though I was born and raised in Hungary, and this is my native language, I have very tight identity and connections with Syria. And it was always important for me to give knowledge about that part of the world, because we did go a lot to Syria with my family. And when I became specialized on foreign affairs, it was kind of an obvious choice for me to be specialized on the Middle East. And having said that, unfortunately, that is an area of the world that is burdened by many conflicts. And when I first had this chance to actually go to a country where there was a war going on, it was not a question for me whether I'm afraid or not. I was, of course, obviously, and I'm still amazed when people stop me on the street who recognize me from TV, like, you're that little short lady from the TV who had visited all those horrible conflicts, how come you're not afraid? And I always say, of course I'm afraid. I mean, I would be a psychopath or have brain damage not to be afraid to go to these spots. And you know what I saw? It was always disappointment, as if I've stolen an illusion of having a recipe for a fearless life. And as a therapist later on explained to me, this is much more simple than that, Hesna. Andrew Feldman, who told me that, it's just, when people think that you're not afraid and you go to these places, and in their head, this is okay. But at the moment when they figure out that you're afraid, and in spite of your fears, you go to these spots, they lose their alibi not to do and go ahead with the things that they would like to do, but they are afraid of. And this really stuck into my mind. And when I was asked to give a TED talk about my work, I eventually chose the topic of fear to talk about my job, because I realized this is something that is interesting for many people, how I handle fear. Because I realized myself that maybe I have the bravery to go to a war zone to work as a correspondent, but on the other hand, in my civil life, I'm just doing the same alibi thing with my fears. I'm trying to get distant from my fears and the things that I think that I'm not comfortable enough to do. So I have this double life, and I realized that there should be an explanation why I am like living in this parallel universe, having the bravery, and I'm intentionally not saying that I am brave to do so, because I hate these labels. I really think there are no brave people and coward people. I think there are situations in which sometimes we are able to act bravely, and maybe the next time in the same situation you won't be able to. But it's true on the other hand too. Sometimes you don't have the courage to do something, but if you try again and again, maybe it will take 10 years, but eventually you will have the courage to step into that situation. So I don't like these labels, and I don't think that I'm brave. I just think that I had the bravery to do things because I had a very, very strong drive, which was curiosity. And I really think that in today's world, curiosity is the pill for so many mental problems, because as long as we have curiosity, that can be such a huge drive to come out of the difficult phases. I was talking to a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor, Edith Eva Eger, the author of the book Choice, which is a New York Times bestseller. She's great. She has Hungarian origins, currently living next to San Diego. And the 93-year-old lady, who's a psychologist now, went through really hell. And she said, what really kept me alive was curiosity, that I always wanted to know what's next. And what I realized that I had this curiosity, which was a strong enough drive for me to go to these places. And, I could use fear as a nice fuel because I didn't think that it's shameful to be afraid in a war zone. Everyone who's at his or her senses would be afraid. So I was okay with my fears. And I realized that because of this, I could use fear as an amazing tool to push my boundaries to the extent. I mean, sometimes we couldn't really properly sleep for days and weeks, or couldn't properly eat or sleep. And we had to do, mentally things that I really thought were way beyond my boundaries, convince people to get us in and let us into places, or to let us out from places. And I could really do things that I didn't think before that I was capable of. On the other hand, in my civil life, fear was just the same for me, what the society taught me, that I should be ashamed of my fears. It's not okay to be afraid. What do we hear on the ground play? You have children, probably you hear the same. Oh, a big boy is not afraid of that, a big girl. So we humiliate children from a very early age on because of their shame. And this is something I think we should get back to that, to the topic of shame later on. So basically, we teach ourselves, and people teach us, that it's not okay to be afraid. So we start to suppress and deny it. And many times we don't even realize that in certain situations of our lives, we are afraid. So we are not able to act out of bravery. And this is why I started to study fear, to realize, so what is the difference that fear can bring out extremely good and extremely really tough things from us, but it can bring out our worst qualities too. Because let me tell you a story. I don't let you ask anything. Sorry, I will stop.
No worries.
But I can really get into that. So just to explain this with an example. One of the first wars where I worked as a correspondent was Lebanon. I brought you some photos too, if Zoltan, you could share these. So it was in 2006, and it was my really first so-called classical war where I was working at. And it was such a lesson for me to learn how I react under pressure and how people react in general when they are under enormous hardships. What happened was that I think it was like the second day of the filming when we were walking in a neighborhood, and it was quite quiet, and then suddenly people started pouring out to the street and screaming loudly, being happy, showing the victory signs for us and for the camera. So we started filming instantly, and we didn't really understand what was going on, but somebody told that Lebanon was able to achieve its first military success in that particular war, and that's why people were celebrating. But then suddenly a man comes out of the crowd, shouting and waving his fist at us. And you won't believe what we witnessed, that this celebrating crowd turned into an angry mob in 30, 40 seconds, and they wanted to lynch us and confiscate our cameras. And apparently that man was shouting that they are spies, because it's just the nature of conflicts. There are always superstitions and these urban legends circling. And in this particular war, there was a legend that all the journalists, TV journalists, went there to spy. And they had these GPS built into their cameras so that the enemy can know where to throw the bombs. Obviously, it was a nonsense. And it was really difficult to argue when you're in an angry mob. And I was really naive, because first I tried to convince the man and the crowd that we are from Hungary, we are okay, and we won't do any harm. But I quickly realized this is not the time for discussion, and we started to run. And we were lucky enough that our driver was just nearby, and we could jump into the car and leave. But it was really scary, because Lebanon is one of the most beautiful and best and most welcoming countries I've been to. I mean, I have relatives there, a lot of friends, and I know that, my best experiences were from Lebanon, having all these amazing gatherings, and people were so generous and friendly, and I just couldn't put the picture together. What happened that the civil population means a bigger threat to us than the bombing that was taking on in Lebanon. And then I quickly realized that, oh my God, how egoistic it is of me to expect rational reaction from people whose lives are being devastated, where everything that you care for is at stake, because maybe you have already lost a family member, maybe everything you worked for will be lost in a few days or a few moments. Obviously, when there's just a 1% chance that a stranger means a threat to you and to your loved ones, you're going to act out of instinct. You cannot expect rational reactions in the most irrational thing of life, which is war. And then in the very same country, in the very same conflict, a few days later, we were filming up in the hills of Beirut, because that's where most people try to escape from the bombing. Yes, and it was amazing to see that in this really divided country, where there had been also civil wars, people were so caring for each other. Everyone really united, and they gave their gardens and put up tents for everyone. And they even welcomed us. They wanted to cook for us, even though they had so little food, and they were so nice and told us, yeah, we are so glad you're here, and we want you to be our guest. And so much altruism and caring for each other was witnessed there that I just couldn't put this picture together. So how come the same thing is happening in the same war? And I realized that this is how fear works. It can bring out our worst qualities and aggression and panic and selfishness and rage, but it can also bring out our very best qualities like altruism and sacrifice and hope and love. So when I started researching fear, one of the very first questions I wanted to know the answer for: what does it depend on? Whether fear brings out the worst or the best qualities from us, because it happened to me too. Sometimes fear brought out lies or panic or aggression from me too. And sometimes fear could push me to the very extreme good side of me. So this was my number one question when I started analyzing my reactions, the stories that I witnessed, and this is how I ended up writing Fear Bravely, which was my first book about fear.
Wow, fantastic! What a story! And yeah, and your book was actually published not only in Hungarian but also in the Netherlands. So please, feel free to check it out. I highly recommend it. I actually started it, and it's quite interesting. And just by chance, or maybe not chance, but I did marry Lebanese. So I did visit Lebanon on several occasions, actually more than 10 occasions. And I spent quite some time there. And I recall that in 2009, we were in a shopping center, in a very nice high-end cafe, enjoying dinner with the family. And suddenly on the TV in the background, there's breaking news. And I'm looking at it, and there was an explosion in Beirut. A car bomb went off. And I'm trying to get everybody's attention. I'm trying to talk to people on the table and say, hey, maybe we should go home. Maybe we should look for shelter. And finally, someone, looks at me and looks at the TV, and he's like, oh, this is just the outskirts. It doesn't matter. Like everything is fine. Just carry on with your dinner and your hummus, and enjoy life. And that was so shocking to me. I was like, wow, this is such a disconnect in terms of how people actually learn to live their life in this constant fear, in this constant notion of like any day, the world can come down, I can lose everything I have, it was just fascinating.
It is, and it was amazing for me to see in Lebanon the same thing, that how life really finds its way all the time, even among the worst conditions and most horrible things. And this was also a question that was really working in me, whether we can live in constant threat, how our body, our brain, which is so, plastic, and neuroplasticity is a word and expression we use now a lot, but what does it mean in reality? How do we adapt to threat and constant threat? And so one of the reasons I went to Afghanistan, I filmed there. Actually, Afghanistan was a country where I always told myself I would never return, because filming there was always just so unexpectedly. It wasn't the normal danger when you knew what was dangerous. It was always more like you could never know what to expect next. And usually I try to work with civilians as a civil, but there was this one time that you see on the photo too, that I decided to go with the military, with Hungarian and American soldiers, because what I wanted to find out, how do they cope with fear? How do they actually handle the constant threat? Because even on this trip, I really felt being in moving in these armed vehicles, that there was always a target X on us. And I think it was more dangerous to move with military people, however they had guns, than to move with civilians without no guards and whatsoever. But this time I was really curious to know how they handle all those situations we went through. And you know what they told us? That fear is the most important tool for us that we work with, because fear helps us in risk assessment. It helps us to detect danger. It is so important for all our functions to really be able to work amongst these conditions, because what they said, that they're more afraid to work with any soldiers who doesn't feel fear. And they think that these soldiers mean a biggest threat to them who don't feel danger than the Taliban. Because really, fear helps them focus. As they said, fear helps them for this tunnel vision that is so important to focus on the things that is needed to survive. And as I said, in risk assessment, so they said really it is more like a tool. And when I started researching the physiology of fear, I realized that yes, it is not by a miracle that fear didn't disappear through evolution, because we need fear. It helps us stay alive. For example, our brain, even when you're sitting here listening to me, even your brain is now constantly checking the possible dangers. Even your brain, you're sitting in front of your computers.
I'm so worried if the internet is going to go down and we're going to interrupt this amazing discussion.
Yeah, if it will, you will actually witness the symptoms of fear on you. I don't know what you do. What do you usually sense in your body when you're afraid? Can you say a few examples? What are the sensations you have?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. It's always starts like being alert, right? Like just suddenly like moving up, like getting ready, putting your shoulders back, making sure that your hands are available, your legs are functioning, they are not fell asleep, and you know where the nearest exit is.
Yeah, those are good ones. Actually, it's so nice to think about our body as a whole beautiful construction that, for example, when you think back the last time, probably most of you are driving, when, for example, someone suddenly got in your way and you had to move the vehicle in an instant without having any time to think. And you did it, and that's when when you managed and you were over the situation, you realized that, oh my God, my hands and my palms are sweating. I had this heart beating very, very fast, and many people have different kind of symptoms too when they actually experience fear. But most of these symptoms are very similar. Kind of being hard to breathe, for example. So basically, when our brain detects danger, a process called the Cannon reaction starts to kick in, which is a process and it's a reaction without a decision being made or having to, because this has to be in an instant in order to survive. What happens through this process is basically over 30 hormones are secreted from the kidney. You probably have heard about the adrenaline and the cortisol. These are the main, most important ones, which, for example, are responsible for pushing more blood into the main muscles. So you can act stronger, you can break a window that you would think is unbreakable, or lift something really heavy when it's like a vis major. More, for example, in the brain, because of these hormones, the brain's glucose usage increases too, so that you are able to concentrate and focus more to be able to survive, to find the solution. And as you see in this drawing or figure that Zoltan is just showing to you, the three main important parts of the brain. And it's so interesting and it's so complex, but at the same time so simple too, how when you experience imminent threat and this Cannon reaction starts and you just act automatically. You're acting out of your reptilian brain because the main goal is to survive. So it's actually kind of like a defense mechanism. And it's so important because really, even if you don't face lions anymore, or for example, the weather doesn't mean a life threat to you anymore, there are still many situations in our lives when our Cannon reaction kicks in and the fight or flight mode kicks in, which means that you either get into the situation, you try to fight, because you think you have the chance to survive, or when you realize you don't, then you flight, you run. And this is very important for our survival. The problem comes when you are not experiencing a life-threatening situation and still you're acting out of your reptilian brain. And that is when, for example, you do things you're not necessarily proud of. Because if you had the chance to think it over and choose your response, you would use the neocortex, as you can see, which is that part of the brain that is responsible for cognitive thinking, for imagination, for rational thought. But many times we don't even let the information get into the neocortex because we act out of our reptilian brain, automatic response, natural instinctive response. And this is why many times I think it is so unuseful that we don't realize that we are acting out of fear. So this is my main mission today, is to help you realize that there are so many situations in your lives when we experience fear, but we are not aware of it, even though we could have the chance to actually influence our body and use fear as a fuel. Let me say just a very everyday example. You have to talk in front of 200 people. There you are waiting for yourself to enter on the stage. You realize that you're tremoring and sweating, and you're all worried. Your breathing is really fast, and then oh my God, I'm afraid. I have to stop this. So you try to turn it off, but can you really turn off being anxious? Can you really turn off fear? Of course not. And by this failure, you get even more anxious, and all this accumulates. And then you have to enter the stage, and you're unable to perform well because fear really puts down you in a spiral. And I'm sure that many of you, or most of you actually, have at least one memory, maybe from early childhood on, when this adrenaline rush ended up in a negative story, that it really brought your performance and your decisions down. And the brain connects these, and most of us have these memories connected to adrenaline rush and having this negative effect of fear. We start to fear of fear itself the most. Mm-hmm. And this is just an ongoing process. So what can we do? Do the contrary. Try to think of the situation when you experience fear the next time as, oh my God, this is for me. Fear is helping me. I'm having the sweating palms and this trembling body because my body is helping me this way to perform better, to act stronger, to focus more. And the minute you change the context of the situation when you experience fear, fear will start to work for you. And if you build, instead of this negative spiral, a history of success, and your brain starts to connect all these together, you'll be able to actually use fear as a positive fuel, because it's really, since I started researching fear, and I did talk to a lot of people who were able to actually influence the physiology of fear in their bodies, it's amazing what we can do mentally. We have a lot bigger and stronger mental power, even on our body and physiological reactions, than we would suppose. I met a guy who's a Norwegian balancing artist who was studied by so many researchers, trying to find out how he's able to perform, for example, on several thousand high rocks, doing these balancing acts without anything who like safety issues. I don't know how safety net. Yeah, I will show you a video if you want. Maybe if we can start it just from the health of it, just to see really how. you this example because it's amazing how he's able to perform this because so basically what he did is he spent a year on an island alone, just studying his own body and his body reactions to different weather circumstances. And he does a lot of visualization techniques before he performs. Of course, he practices a lot too, but I think he does a lot more work in his brain than actually physically. And basically what researchers found that he is able to just gradually increase his pulse in the upcoming days before he actually performs, so that his pulse will not kick in when he starts the performance. He's able to pump it up just gradually. He learned how to influence this. And also the adrenaline rush comes only after like 30 or 50 minutes of the performance. And he really thinks that visualization technique is so powerful because what he does is that before he performs, he spends days and weeks visualizing the performance itself in real time. And he goes step by step. And it's so interesting that there were many researches showing that actually when you're visualizing something is like dreaming, the same brain parts are activated than when you're actually doing it. And there are different methods for sportsmen, for example, like mental training or mental correction that are built on this, that, you know, when you're visualizing something, when you made a mistake, for example, in your previous contest, and you visualize the same thing and you correct it in your head, visually, mentally, your brain will reach out to that latest experience and not to the one when you failed. And Eskil is doing the same. He's visualizing it. And there was one so interesting thing that he said, that when he does the performance in his mind, he does it step by step, and then he falls. And then he does it again, step by step, and he succeeds. And when I asked, why do you do that? I mean, many times we are told that don't visualize negative things because then you will just attract that. And he said, no, that's not true, because we are afraid of the unknown. Once you want to avoid something happening, your brain will be just attracted of thinking about that. That's when you just actually attract that thing to happen. But when you know it, when you visualize it, when you live through that in your mind, it's not something unfamiliar. You just befriend death, as he said. So it's not that threatening anymore. And then he just simply chooses the way when he succeeds. So it was a very nice lesson for me to learn. And I did research how we can actually hack our brain. And there are so many nice studies about how we are actually just with our body position, how we are influencing what's happening in our brain and how safe we feel. Because just think about, when we are afraid, what do? We hunch up. Why is it? Evolutionary, to protect yourself, to be small, to be invisible, because you don't want to be prey. So you try to act invisible. So when we are feeling unsafe because we are afraid of a situation around us, not necessarily because of real threat, but of anything, because many times we are just afraid of hurting our egos, right? Or somebody will hurt our egos. But when you send the signal that you're afraid, your brain will feel unsafe. So when you realize that you're doing this, just expand. And with this, you send the signal to your brain, I am safe. Open the horizon. When we are all nervous about something and afraid, the horizon, just narrows. Open the horizon. At that moment, you will see more options, more solutions to your problems. And try to act like your nose and your eyes are pointing to the same direction, because this is also actually what prays you, looking right and left and right and left. So just focusing and keeping your nose and eyes to the same direction sends your brain the signal that you're safe. Breathing techniques, I'm sure you've heard about that, but this is so interesting too. Like, why do we do ribcage breathing when we are afraid, like this? Because, we tighten our belly muscles that will protect our inner organs. This is evolutionary reason too. So what do? We expand and we do the belly breathing. Very deep breaths, like 5 moments to inhale through the nose, down into the belly, not here, to the belly, and then 6 moments to exhale. When you have to run from the lion, you don't have time to breathe like that, right? So when you're just loosening up your belly and breathing slowly, again, you send the signal to your brain, you are safe. I'm just telling you because next time you want to perform somewhere, or when you're just experiencing general anxiety, these techniques can really help you alter your physical sensation of safety. And also, self-talk is so powerful. Referring back to this interview I made with Editiva Eger, the Holocaust survivor lady, she said that she did a lot of self-talk in the death camp, and that really helped her change the context of where she was, how she sensed the world around her. And there are actually really research is showing that if you say it aloud, that this is not a problem, this is a challenge. Saying it out loud, not only doing the self-talk, will actually have more effect on how your brain perceives a given situation. So you can really change the context of a fearful situation for your own benefit.
Wow, that's fantastic. So we learned a lot about the physiology of fear. One thing I always struggle with is mislabeling fear, right? Like oftentimes I feel anger or I feel disgust. A typical example nowadays is when people are trying to shake hands. You approach the person. Are you going to shake? Are you going to do a fist bump? Are you going to and it's actually sometimes I feel like, oh, this person is disgusted to touch me or something, but actually they're just afraid to get a virus. But it does happen in many other situations. I notice on myself that, for example, I get angry on the kid because, he did something. But at the end, maybe I'm just afraid that, he's going to hurt himself. And how do I cope with that? How do I, manage to properly label emotions so I can actually react and handle them properly?
Yeah, that is so nice example, because this is so true that many times there's fear working in the death of our act, in death of our act, but we don't realize it because, as I said, you were taught from early age on that it's not okay to feel afraid, but because then you're a coward, so you shouldn't feel afraid because that's when you're weak. So you learn how to suppress it, or just when you're afraid of something, your body is actually sensing these negative emotions many times quicker than mentally. And you know that there's something negative going on. So you take this negative energy load and just throw it at someone else and shout at someone without even realizing that you are afraid deep inside. Because what happens, it's okay. I mean, it's shameful to be afraid, but it's sexy to be angry, right? I mean, when you're on top of a hierarchy,
it's very macho, yeah.
It's a lot more macho. You cannot show that you're afraid, but being angry or having rage is okay. Why, I ask? Because this is how we were taught, but we can actually change this culture. And I have to tell you a nice anecdote too about Norbert Michaelis. I'm sure who are from Hungary or follow the events in Hungary know that he's a number one car racer. He's really great. And I just made an interview with him a few months ago. And he said that, Hesna, when I started racing, I was already very good, achieving very good results, but I was always afraid of the kickoff of the race. Mm-hmm. That was my weak point. And what I did, he said, was trying to push it aside and not really focus on that, because I thought that with everything that I'm better at, I shifted my focus on that to balance it, that I'm not good at that and I'm afraid of that. So I tried to balance it by focusing on my strong points. And he realized that it is bad strategy, because this is what we do many times. You don't put focus on that, but it will stay like that. And you start avoiding it, but it won't be solved. And this general uneasiness will just have an effect on the rest of your performance too. So what he did when he realized this is not a good strategy is that he really started asking himself, and this is what we can also do. Why am I afraid of that? When we are afraid of something, we push it away. So it will be even more frightening because we have even less information about that thing. Take your fears, face your fear, first of all, identify your fears and put all your focus on that. If you pull it closer to yourself and ask and stay in that for a few moments and ask yourself, why am I afraid of that? What does it tell about me? What does it tell about my history? And you really put energy in trying to identify your fears and trying to dig deep why you experience that, because fear is a signal. It's just the best signal ever, because it shows the lack of your capacities or your lack of trust in your capacities on the given area. And both are so important. I don't know if you've seen the Billions series. It's such a nice, it's about a businessman and the main character who's just really macho man. And everyone thinks that he is just not afraid of anything. He knows everything. And at one particular time, he says, fear, I like to be afraid. And everyone looks at him like, are you crazy? Yeah, because fear is something like this metallic taste at the back of my throat that always tells me that I have to watch out. I'm missing something. So I really love this. And I think it's so nicely put, because when you're afraid of something and you pull it closer and you just spend energy on observing, why am I afraid? It tells you so much about yourself, your intentions, your past, and your goals. So basically, what I really advise to put focus on your fears, and what Mihaly Snorby said, that the moment he started putting energy on this field and he started to improve, then it really had an enormous effect on the rest of his abilities too. What he thought that he was good at, he became even better, because just gaining confidence from improving in what you think you're weak at, it really helps you to perform overall better. And I think we are living in this macho culture where even for men, mainly for men, it's just, forbidden to admit that they're afraid of something or they don't know something. We are afraid of showing our vulnerability so much. But I did talk to a lot of managers in the past years who were able to stand out in front of their people who were working for them. This was this occasion in 2008, for example, when this top of the company realized that they had to shift what the profile was, the company, because otherwise they would have gone down and shut the business. And he just collected all the managers and he said, guys, I will admit, I'm afraid, because if we keep on doing what we're doing, probably we'll have to close down. I'm even more afraid to change our profile, because then it means a lot of risks. But now I'm telling you this because you're my managers for a reason. We can all admit and talk about our fears and our doubts, and we can come up with a solution together. And they were really able to find a solution, and the flow in the company just quickly changed so much that now they're still operating and very flourishing. And this is what I think is a very good lesson, that if you're a boss or if you're a father, I mean, we can take any communities when somebody is responsible for other people and you act like you know everything. You don't have mistakes. You're not afraid of everything because you think that is what will give safety to others. No, not at all, because if they think that you're not afraid of everything, they will be ashamed of their doubts. Would you go to a boss and give a feedback about a problem, or give an innovative but crazy idea to someone who you think is just perfect and is not afraid of anything? Of course, no. I mean, I wouldn't want to engage with a stone, right?
Yep.
If you showed your vulnerabilities, I would feel as a human, as a partner to you, and that would instantly just change the flow. And shaming others because of being afraid is just the worst, because shame is a very destructive, it can be destructive. Certain amount of shame is inevitable because we are human beings. But at a certain point, shame is also pushes the same parts of the brain where pain is located. It's not a miracle that when we talk about the pain of shame, and it just further kicks in your fear response and your stress center. So it can be really devastating. And when you tell your kid that you shouldn't be afraid of this and that because you're grown up and you're big, then you just really teach that kid that, oh my God, you shouldn't talk about your fears anymore. Just suppress it. And then it will do an undermining work, because we cannot turn off our emotions. What I really advise for everyone is just to sit down with a glass of wine or a hot chocolate or tea, and just try to write down the list of your fears and try to spend a little bit of time and asking yourself, so why am I afraid of that? And just one another thing that was really useful to me from one of the interviews I made. A futurologist told me that we should, of course, we know that anxiety and fear are not the same, but he gave me this beautiful formula that anxiety is actually fear multiplied with imagination.
Oh, wow.
And this is why it's so destructive, because when you're afraid of something, you can get into that situation and just, practice getting into it and acting in it as you build a muscle. But anxiety doesn't have an end, because it's your fear multiplied with imagination, which doesn't have borders and boundaries. It just takes place somewhere in the obscure future. So your alert system is turned on, which is nice when you have to run away from a car or lion or whatever. But when you have just imaginatory elements in your head, what can happen? It will kick in the same fear response and kind of reaction from time to time, eating up your immune system slowly. So when you write this fear list in the evening, try to really see how much imaginatory element you have in these, and try to sort out your fears from these what's the word? Anxieties. Thank you, because it's really helpful. And for me, a great technique during COVID was looking at my anxieties. Is like, okay, I know I have these anxieties. I usually tell my main anxiety. It's a bit personal, but it's okay. So I was afraid that my parents would catch it because they work as doctors. They're around 70 years old, and it's really, I mean, it was difficult at the beginning, just as in the United States, in Hungary, that they are in kind of the front line and they would catch it. But this was something that I was unable to do anything, and this is the worst when you're just lack the control over what you're afraid of. So what I did that I told myself, this is a returning anxiety. Therapists usually advise, give it a title, because once you give it a title, you distance yourself from these anxieties. We usually identify ourselves with our emotions, but we are not equal with our emotions. You can stay in the emotion, but be an observer instead of a judger. Don't judge yourself for feeling what you're feeling. Don't try to turn it off. You will fail. Instead, little bit come out to an outer perspective and observe, what am I experiencing? Try to name the emotion and try to observe, why am I feeling that? And this moment, you create a distance between yourself and the emotion. So this is what I did, and I realized, okay, so I can actually, again, change perspective. Say that, okay, I can spend all this amount of energy on being worried that they will catch the virus, or I shift perspective and say, I can spend this amount of energy on being happy that they still didn't catch it. And if they will, that will be enough to worry about that. And this shift of focus can be really hard when you're really deep in your anxiety, but just practicing day by day, more self-awareness, realizing, what am I feeling? Being an observer, why am I feeling that? What can I do with it? It's really helpful, because at the end of the day, I realized that what brings out the best and the worst from you as regards to fear was really this point. When I realized that I was afraid, I accepted it. I decided I won't be ashamed because of it. I was able to choose my response, because the moment you become an observer, you won't act instinctively anymore. You won't be in your reptilian brain anymore. Just by coming out to this observer perspective pushes you up to the neocortex, and you're able to choose your response. When you don't want to accept your emotions, you don't recognize, or you recognize but you suppress it because you're ashamed, because you think it's inadequate, then you won't be able to choose your response. You still remain in your reptilian brain. So self-awareness and just looking at control from a different perspective can be so helpful. We've been in the States for a few months, and can I share another personal anecdote?
This is great.
We had some difficult moments because I came with 2 children and my husband, and the small one is 3 years old and the older is 7.
Sure, the husband was the problem.
As usual, right? And it was so, my kids are really fantastic, because they came here without speaking the language, and they're so cute, and they went to, and the older one went to school without speaking any word of English. I'm so proud of her. But obviously, when she came home, we really experienced that she had hardships of just relaxing. And I realized that this really reminded me to children at the age of 3, when they are at this age when they say no to everything, they want to control the parents. And because if we feel that we are losing control on one part of our lives, we try to take it back on other parts of our lives. And I just realized that, yeah, I'm doing the same thing. And I think people are doing the same thing, even when we are adults, that if we feel that we are losing control in our profession, for example, many times we don't realize that this is what's happening. But we are losing control. What we realize that we become more impatient, and maybe our tolerance level goes down, and we're not realizing why. And many times when we are losing control on one section of our life, we try to take that control back in our private life, for example, with our family, with our husband or children. Or when it happens in our private life, we lose control because our relationships is just going on a path we don't want, and we are unable to do anything, and we freak out, we lose control. Maybe we try to balance it in our corporate or professional life without realizing that we're bossing everyone around because we want to grab back that sensation of control. And this is so interesting because once we realize this, there's a moment when we can actually change things. Losing control is the number one stress source of everyone, of human beings. This is normal. But what is not normal, that now more than ever we try to hold on to control, because due to technology, innovations, and the internet, we used to get just instant feedback and response to everything. So now our desire for control is even higher. But this really causes so much anxiety. So we have to practice letting control. Let it out. I mean, this COVID, if it taught something, is that we cannot control things. Even if we try to stick into our own apartment and not move out, not take any chances, because we think that we will feel secure if we don't change circumstances, COVID showed that it's not valid anymore. And you won't be able to control so many things in your life. So what you can actually do is just to take a shift and try to act like, do I really want control? Or is change sometimes good? Can I learn something about myself if things change? I always used to be a very slow student when I was a child. I was always the last in finishing everything. I was a good student, but it was really stressful to be the last in everything because I was always daydreaming and here and there. And when I became a war correspondent, I mean, would you send someone to the front? Obvious, you know. Fortunately, there was no other Arab speakers in the department, so I had to go. But what I realized about myself, that I was quick, I was sharp, I was efficient, because I realized that under pressure, I'm acting a lot better, I'm performing a lot better. So sometimes we need a lot of pressure and change of circumstances and hardships to reveal our true capacities. And many people don't take even positive changes because they are afraid of losing control and not knowing how they would react. But what we will learn about ourselves? Nothing. So I really advise everyone to embrace change, embrace that sometimes we have to go real hardships in order to find out who we are. Even if it's difficult, we can always find benefit. And I think if we look at COVID as we have to live with this great possibility to sit down with ourselves, with our family, with our colleagues, and think it over. How could I react? How did I react well? How did I adapt well in these past months? Because there were so many things to be done to adapt. We didn't even realize how nicely we adapted to change circumstances. And if we don't realize it, we just let that positive experience flow. It won't be a building, reassuring stone in our self-concept. So I think now it is the time to sit down and talk it over. How did I adapt well? Give yourself credit. I was able to find new solutions. I was able to find new perspectives. Sit down with your colleagues and talk it over. What's the meaning of everything we went through? How did we become stronger out of it? Because these will actually build up your self-confidence to adapt to change better. Because you will believe that no matter how circumstances change, no matter you won't be able to control everything, when the decisive moment comes, you will be able to react well. But in order to believe this, you have to trust yourself.
Fantastic! Wow! What a great discussion, and you touched upon on so many important topics, from the topic of shame to rejection, fear, also resilience and growth, and these very useful tricks and tips of how to kind of identify this. And as you were talking, a lot of the things that you were talking about connected with a lot of things that I read about, actually, like taking on challenges is like the hero's journey, right? Like that's what we love about movies, also, like just the hero getting into trouble and then finding his way out and growing through this journey. but also things like even things that Bela Hambash talks about in some of his books about just identifying your demons and labeling them, and then you can separate them. But then you cannot actually tear it apart. It's also part of you, so it's going to be there, but you're going to be able to control them. Going back to Andrew Feldmar, who is one of my favorite authors, the book he wrote on Élet a halál előtt is one of the most influential books also in my life, kind of overstepping this fear of rejection, and being able to say like, no, actually I need new challenges in my life. I should step out of my comfort zone and bring on what the world has, because the worst thing is if you forget to live before you die. So no, this was fantastic. I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, maybe Zoli, you can help us read it, because we're a little bit further from the laptop.
I have not seen any posted question yet, but if you have a question, please remember to unmute yourself and then talk. Révi Tamás, please go ahead. You are still muted.
I'm sorry.
It's unmuted, I think.
How about now?
Now it's good.
Okay. So I have a few questions. If you guys remember the three brains, what Zoltán showed us, do we have any quantitative numbers which part of the brain is more responsible for the fear? Is it, since I'm assuming that when you're born like a child, you don't have that feeling, so it comes with the experience, how you grew up and how you learn certain stuff. So I'm wondering, do we have any quantitative measurements or tests or anything, how the fear builds up in a human starting from very young age and going up to certain time, looking at the three brains, or I should say it's the three part of, because we have one brain. That's my first.
Well, I think it would be very difficult to find any overall research about that, because I'm not aware of any research which has done like a lifelong span research on how through the brain development, the different fearful experiences influence brain function. But we do know that for children, I mean, because of their developing brain, their emotional brain is not that complex and not that finished. This is why they react to different circumstances differently. Of course, mainly the amygdala and also the reptilian brain is responsible for this canon reaction and for this instinctive reaction to the fearful event. But as you say, there are fears that we actually learn from patterns that we see from our parents or from environment. For example, they say like fearing of the spider. If the child sees that the mother is screaming all the time when she sees a spider, the first reaction could be learning these fears. So I do think that it would be, yes, a very exciting experiment to be made. We can propose it to some researchers. I'm not sure it would get the ethical permissions for that, but it is true that unfortunately we do learn a lot of fears, and the fact that our society plays on manipulation with fear even more than ever, and through the social media, it's getting in under our skin even, because there are researches showing that every message is double effective, which has a certain element of fear in it. And politicians and PR people are very happy and eager to use that, unfortunately. So we constantly fear that we are living in a more and more dangerous world surrounded by all these fears. So eventually we will think that, oh my God, okay, all these threats are here. I'm not taking responsibility for my own life. And I'm sure that this fear culture also has a negative effect of brain development of children to being exposed to so many so-called threats. But this is something we can also work on, being just more cautious about this and being more aware and consuming news more alertly, being critical thinkers and teaching our kids to be critical thinkers is important.
I have one more question or comment, if you like. Um, if you look at the certain conditions, I'm talking about my life experience. I think there are differences between fear and fear. Usually, I think like when you have anxieties because you that's a condition that you already experienced some failure and you had the fear that you will repeat it again and it won't work, so you fail again. Having said that, I think the fear itself, if it's unknown, so let's say in the war times, I grew up in Hungary. I was 5 years old in 1956. I barely remember a couple items, but some of them I clearly remember. And it was a life changing experience to go through with my parents. And we survived essentially. So the good news is that there was no end, but it's a different fear when you are going through war times, when you don't know what's next, when the bombs began to fall, when the tank shells will hit, when the I clearly remember our house was in the side, it's called Szabó Ilonka utca on the Vár, the Burg. Our window looked at the Hunyadi Szobor, and about November 4th, just about today, the Russian tanks couldn't move beyond the big curve in the Hunyadi statue. They landed at the end of Szabó Ilonka utca, and we were the first house about 50 yards. And the tank guns were facing our wall, and you don't know when they will fire or will not fire. So, and this picture is clearly still with me. And of course, we were going down to the basement, so we didn't and finally they didn't shoot. But so back to the question, like the fear itself, like in Hungary, there is a very interesting two words. One is félelem, the other one is rettegés, the dread, the fear and the dread. I feel some serious difference between. What do you think? Can you quantify it, or can you comment it? Is there any similar situation in your experience?
Thank you for the question and for sharing your this part of your life. Two things came to my mind. Yes, yes, I did witness, unfortunately, scenes like that and fears of to an amazing extent in war situations.
Yeah.
As you said, yes, and I think another very important element of it that during war we already talk about traumatization, what we didn't have time to talk about, but trauma is a so important part of it, because when you are suffering trauma, basically your brain starts to function differently. Your alert system is a lot more sensitive, and even when you're after the trauma, your reactions to different circumstances can be a lot overreactive as well, because your brain is just referring to these previous events, what we call now PTSD, as you probably all heard this. But the essence of it basically is that when you experience trauma and your brain starts to function differently, many times later on, when you're traumatized, basically you see the world through filters. Many times people don't even realize that they are traumatized. the difficult thing is you don't necessarily have to be in a traumatic war in order to experience trauma, because an overwhelming work or a relationship can cause on a long term the same effect, being traumatized. But how you notice when somebody's traumatized, you start, your connections change. Your human connections start to alter and change. Your tolerance level decreases, and you become a lot more sensitive to a lot of inputs and to a lot of events. And what I saw in wars, that many times children are brought up already being traumatized. This is, I think, one of the most difficult things in the Middle East, that because of the ongoing wars, many children are traumatized in the womb, and there's no chance for real normality, because the children and the generations being brought up have already this oversensitive, overreactive brains because of having suffered trauma. And of course, there are many therapeutic ways now, very amazing new ones too, that work with the body. And this is so interesting that now the new trauma, now the new ways to deal with trauma all have to do with the body sensations, like somatic experience from Peter Levin, if you might heard about it or read about it. It's really fantastic that he says that having suffered a trauma doesn't have to do with only your mental state of mind. The half of the story is about the body, because when you suffer a trauma, there are these frozen connections between your brain and your muscles that have to be released. So they're very nice new methods. But still, what I witness is that many times it's still a stigma to ask for help, and many times being traumatized can actually lead into becoming even into a worse state of mind and being even more oversensitive about that. And just quickly, the other thing is about the different fears. I did meet a concept about the hierarchy of fears, and it was put into a pyramid. It's from Karl Albrecht, and he said that at the top of the pyramid is the fear of the ego death, and the bottom is the fear of death. And in between, there are three other fears, like fear of mutilation, fear of exclusion, and basically what he argues is that now
it feels like the Maslow pyramid in a way.
It is, and he said that it's actually, he came to this idea based on the Maslow pyramid. So now, when we are in peace, many of our fears are connected to the top, the death of our ego, fearing about, will I be accepted? Will I be ashamed? Am I enough? Am I too much? And basically, many of our fears nowadays are connected to the ego death. But when you go to war, it's basically you go down to the bottom of the fear. Of the pyramid is the fear of death, fear of passing. And what I witnessed is that in our everyday peaceful life, this pyramid is also like upside down, because the pyramid's bottom with the ego death is this way, because we are constantly fearing of our ego. And we want to protect our ego, and we read books about it, and we go to different trainings about it, and we don't want to think about our physical death because it's hard to face it, and we don't want to deal with it. But when you go to war, this pyramid changes back to its original shape, and everything becomes about survival. So yes, he also argues that all of our phobias are connected to these 5 basic fears, and yes, during war, the death of ego becomes irrelevant, I guess, and you basically go down to the bottom of your fear pyramid.
And especially if the time, if it goes on too long, the fear become acute and actually is unrecoverable. So your system has no way to recover. If it goes year after year after year, it's just, that it's really, really sad, because how many broken children and how many broken parents and humans are living that constant fear year after year after year without any hope. So,
And then the good news is, I think, that there is hope. Basically, now I'm at Berkeley to study post-traumatic growth, which is a very exciting phenomenon, which means that basically, if we go through the different stages of grief and we process trauma, we are even able to grow from it. Of course, you need sometimes help to get out of the trauma and to go through this healing process. but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because many people are actually able to grow from these traumatic experiences and say that they achieved a happier and more content life. Basically, not thanks to the trauma, but thanks to everything that they gathered as an experience from the trauma. So my research would try to collect all the valid material and answers to that. How can we grow from a trauma? What are the elements? How can we help our children to be more resilient to hardships, and really find the answers to what really matters? Can we actually build this in ourselves? Because I guess it's not only up to genes; it has a lot of factors, and I hope that maybe a year from now I will be able to talk about that even in more in depth.
Well, that's an excellent closing thought. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we reached our time. Would enjoy having this discussion until the end of the day. But we definitely gonna have you back in a year's time, and very, very curious about your findings. So with that, please join me in a big round of applause for Hesna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you, Zoli.
Thank you. Thanks for attention for everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.